Let's take a look at the $1 million Stephenville collection of Lincoln cents. We'll start off with a fairly modern variety on a shield penny that you could have in your pocket change right now. This is the 2014 doubled obverse cent. The doubling on this coin can be detected on the letters of trust, liberty, as well as on the date. But the best place to spot the doubling, it is definitely the date, where all of the numbers almost seem as though they were stretched out or elongated. The additional thickness can clearly be seen towards the top and the bottoms of the numbers 2, 0, and the horizontal bar of the number 4 as well. Graded by PCGS as MS66 Red, this variety was sold at auction for the amount of $556. 1942 has a veritable deluge of variety coins to look for if you're searching through or simply collecting Lincoln pennies. One such coin is this doubled obverse type, where there are numerous markers to keep an eye out for. However, the strongest indicator by far is the widespread and the subsequent impressive doubling to be seen on Lincoln's eyelid, where the entire eyelid, and in fact even a portion of the eye itself, is doubled towards the right. This coin, an MS64 Red graded example from PCGS, was sold at auction for the sum of $480. Another spectacular repunched mintmark variety can now be seen here. This coin is actually a triple punched mintmark variety, but the initial depunching that took place towards the south of the primary impression is fairly weak, to the point where you really do need an early die state example to spot it, and this coin is definitely not that. So the best you can do is to spot the still very strong repunching that took place towards the northeast, which is rather impressive all on its own, to be fair. This beautiful little coin was graded as MS66 Red by PCGS, and at auction secured a final price of $504. Next in line is a nice example of what is known as distended hub doubling. Not quite as dramatic as rotated or tilted up doubling, as it mostly takes the form of additional thickness on the letters or numbers on the design. But in this case, it is the numbers of the date that are the best indicators of the doubling. Specifically, the tail of the 9 is especially much wider than it normally should be, and upon closer inspection you'll notice that both of the 4s of 1944 are also similarly affected. This coin was graded by PCGS as MS66 Red, and at auction it raised $516 by final call. Repunched mint marks from the 1980s can be a real challenge for the variety collector to find. This 1987 D over D coin is a fantastic example of this, as it is also one of the nicer varieties for this type. The D mint mark almost looks doubled in a way, with the repunching evident towards both the top and the bottom of the D mint mark. The discoloration that you see towards the southeast of the mint mark has actually nothing to do with the repunching, and it's just a plating or a laminating issue that can be safely ignored in this case. You can even see the same thing happening on the reverse of the coin in places as well. Graded by PCGS as MS67 Red, it was sold at auction for the sum of $528. Over mintmark varieties are always a fantastic find, and this 1951 D over S mintmark variety is a fantastic example of just such, although the auction results for this case may be somewhat misleading in that regard, with a primary D mintmark struck in, or rather struck over, fairly squarely on top of the initial S mint mark. Not too much of the initial S remains. What is left of the S can be seen mostly towards the top left of the D mint mark, with a slight remnant just towards the south as well. This coin was graded by PCGS as a fantastic MS67 Red, and at auction it sold for the price of $528. In early 1960, the US Mint found that the number 0 that was used on the new memorial cent coins was prone to both filling and breakage. So, in an attempt to avoid this problem, they altered the date just so slightly, leading to the creation of what we now know as the small and large date varieties. A side-by-side comparison will reveal the difference in the date used on both types, especially the 0 of the date. This small date variety coin, which is the scarcer of the two, was graded by PCGS as MS67 red, and at auction it managed to raise $552. And because there were two date types for 1960, that makes it a transitional year, with all of the customary shenanigans that come along with that. Luckily enough for coin collectors though, that means the creation of coins like this. The large date over small date double die obverse type proof coin variety. The date is doubled in a spectacular manner, where the small date type was first impressed and then doubled atop of that with a large date type. The letters of Liberty are then also doubled to spectacular effect. The B, E, and R of Liberty in particular tend to stand out in this case. This coin was graded by PCGS as proof 68 red, and when its turn on the auction block came, it sold for $504. When the 1970 small and large date varieties were initially discovered, it caused quite a bit of excitement in the hobby, many people still remembering the 1960 coins. Here we have an example of the proof 1970 S small date coin, which is the rarer of the two. On the small date coin, the tops of the numbers of the date are all at the same height, while on the large date coin, the 7 is a little bit lower than the 9 and the 0, in addition to the 0 of the date just being a different shape altogether. Another way to tell the difference between the two is to check the letters of Liberty, as on the small date coin the letters become less well defined as you move towards the center of the coin when compared to the large date coin. This coin was sold at auction graded by PCGS as proof 68 red deep cameo for the sum of $552. Looking at another proof coin variety, but this time it is the 1972S doubled obverse coin. This one is oftentimes overshadowed by the 1971 double die obverse coin, as they are significantly more pronounced. But here we can definitely detect signs of doubling, mostly in the form of separation lines on the letters on the obverse design. The letters of "In God We Trust" should all display this feature with ample abandon, while the letters of Liberty are also affected, with the L and the B typically being a good indicator of that here. PCGS slapped the coin with a grade of proof 67 red cameo, and at auction it was sold for $552. 1983 was a very good year for variety coins, especially within the Lincoln Cent series. It even has multiple doubled reverse varieties that you can keep an eye out for. This is the FS502 type that lacks the strong doubling on the letters of E pluribus unum that are so characteristic of the FS501 coin. Here though, the letters of United are the best indicators for this variety, both in terms of sheer noticeability and the spread that was achieved when the doubling took place. In addition, the letters of 1 cent are also doubled very nicely, but nowhere near as boldly as the features of United. The coin was sold at auction in a PCGS slab with a grade of MS65 red for the sum of $552. The 1939 doubled obverse Lincoln penny is a surprisingly difficult coin to locate, and the premium for the coin is not really commensurate with the scarcity of the coin in the market. I suspect that not too many people are actually looking for the variety, which is a true shame. Doubling is seen towards the northeast on the 1 and the first 9 of the date, as well as on the Berti or B-E-R-T section of the word liberty. This effect of the doubling is particularly noticeable on the T, where it is displayed almost due south of the intended position. Graded by PCGS as a superb MS67 red, this coin was sold at auction for $552. Here is an early proof coin variety. What we are looking at now is the 1951 proof doubled obverse penny. Once again, a somewhat underrated variety if you ask me. I suspect that it is due to it being on the proof strike of this year and not the regular circulation strike. At any rate, the doubling here is best seen on the letters of "In God We Trust," especially the latter half of the motto, where the letters of trust are doubled towards the left very clearly. At auction, this PCGS graded example of the coin at a grade of proof 66 red cameo was sold for $576. This is the 1988 wide AM penny. Now, not to get too technical about it, but I think this is actually somewhat of a misleading name for the coin, and it should rather be called the serifed or flared FG variety instead, as that is definitely more accurate or descriptive of the reverse design variety that was used on this coin. Now, you can see the designer's initials of FG found towards the right of the memorial building is the best way to distinguish this type. On a normal coin from 1988, the G of FG is plain and has no serif or a horizontal bar in the center of the letter. This variety coin, however, used reverse design variety number 6, which does have a serif on that letter. This coin is graded as MS66 red, and at auction it raised a total of $576. 1911 has multiple repunched mint mark varieties to look for, including coins from Denver and San Francisco. This coin is from the Denver Mint and is the FS502 repunched mint mark type, to be precise. The remnants of the initial punching of the D mint mark can still be detected just below the primary D. In addition to that, the top serif of the initial punching is also present in this same orientation, relative to its final placement, of course. At auction, a PCGS graded MS63 brown example of this variety was sold for $586. Now this is a coin that you could very realistically find while searching coin rolls, or even, if you're very lucky, in pocket change. It is the 1980 doubled obverse memorial cent, which also happens to be a very nice case of pivoted hub doubling, expressed best as doubling on the initial letters of Liberty towards the southeast. The L, I, and B are the best examples of this. The strongest doubling, though, is seen on the date, where strong separation lines are seen on all of the numbers, though it's worth pointing out that the 8 is especially notable in this regard. Graded by PCGS as MS65 red, this lovely coin was sold at auction for the sum of $600. A repunched mint mark variety from 1950 is next on our journey through the Lincoln penny varieties. Hailing from the San Francisco Mint, this is a rather appealing S over S mint mark variety that should make a great find for any collector or coin searcher. The initial S can clearly be seen directly towards the north of the final placement of the mint mark, with the remnant of the initial serif and the rounding of the S towards the left still detectable towards the top. This coin was graded by PCGS as MS67 red, and at auction it sold for $600. This 1942 doubled obverse penny is not the strongest variety you'll ever come across. It is further complicated by the fact that you really need an early die state example to see the full doubling on the letters of Liberty, which this coin is not. That really only leaves the date, where here you can see the doubling on the number 1, displaying in the form of a nice ghost image of sorts towards the northeast of the primary impression. The same can also be said, at least to a certain degree, for the number 9. This coin was graded as XF40 by PCGS, and at auction it was sold for $600. 1934 is actually a pretty good year for varieties, especially in the Lincoln Penny series, with even a number of major repunt mintmark varieties from the Denver Mint to look for. This is the FS503 type, where it is actually a quadruple punched mintmark. 4 impressions, although 2 of those are so faint that on most coins it makes it basically impossible to spot. So focus instead on the clearly struck in secondary mint mark that is directly towards the south of the D. This example was graded by PCGS as MS64 Red Brown and sold at auction for $601. You know, ever since I was a kid who just got started collecting, I've been hearing people say, oh, coin collecting, it's not what it used to be, it's going the way of the dodo, blah, blah, blah. But that is not what I see every day. To me, this hobby, it's a living, breathing thing that keeps changing, yes, but it's not going anywhere. So quit your yammering, Karen. This 1947 doubled obverse penny variety to me is proof of that. It was only discovered in the 1990s, 50 years after its initial release. And that's not a unique story by any means. Doubling here can be seen very clearly on the date, mostly towards the north, but the better doubling is evident on the letters of "In God We Trust," especially the letters of trust, where the doubling is seen displaying towards the right on every letter. Graded by PCGS as MS66 Red, this coin sold at auction for $660. Most varieties that you encounter will be a mintmark variety of some description, or a coin that was inadvertently doubled during the hubbing process. But sometimes you may come across a coin like this that was tripled, or that displays tripling on the design. Now, admittedly, it's not the strongest case for such a variety, but the 1970s triple obverse proof 1-cent coin does have its moments, with tripling displaying in the form of separation lines. This can be seen on the date, especially in the 7 and the 0. The first few letters of Liberty is another good example to spot this effect, but I like to check the letters of "In God We Trust," especially the G of God, that will be tripled very clearly. This coin was graded by PCGS as Proof 67 Red Deep Cameo and was sold at auction for $660. When I say the 1955 double die obverse Lincoln Penny, it would only be natural to assume that I'm talking about this coin. But there is also a lesser known double obverse variety for this issue that you can keep an eye out for. On this, the FS102 variety, the doubling here is concentrated more on the letters of "In God We Trust," with doubling displaying towards the northeast of the letters in question. PCGS gave this coin a grade of MS65 Red, and at auction it was sold for the sum of $660. Then we have a proof coin variety from 1963 that is one of the strongest doubled reverse proof varieties you are likely to come across anytime soon. And this is a year before the production of proof coins were temporarily suspended due to the national coinage shortage. The doubling can be seen on most of the letters, but the N in cent is a particularly nice example that displays the doubling clearly. But the last 2 letters of America, the C and last A, is also a good place to spot the doubling if you're unsure. This coin was graded by PCGS as Proof 68 red, and at auction it attained a closing price of $720. A repunched mint mark variety from 1938. Not the much more talked about triple punched S variety from this year, but the FS101 S over S repunched mint mark coin instead. Here, the S mint mark was repunched over an existing S mint mark, the remnants of which are still barely seen towards the top of the primary S below the date. This coin was graded by PCGS as MS67 plus red and sold at auction for the sum of $720. When looking through 1984 pennies, most people will look for the doubled ear variety, as indeed we all should. But that should not be done to the exclusion of this variety, where the ear is normal but the date is clearly doubled on the obverse. The 9 is especially clearly doubled with separation lines running along the tail of the number. Furthermore, the bottom rounding of the 8 is also doubled in much the same manner. This coin was graded by PCGS as MS65 red, and during the auction it sold for $720. Despite the great care generally given to their creation, even proof coins are not immune from spawning variety coins, a case demonstrated by this 1956 proof coin that displays some unmistakable doubling on the obverse design, best demonstrated by additional thickness and some subtle separation lines on the numbers of the date, especially towards the bottom right of the 9, the 5, and 6. The letters of Liberty are also affected by the doubling. The I and the E are especially clear in this respect. Graded by PCGS as Proof 69 red, it was sold at auction for $720. Another great example of a proof variety on offer was this 1953 doubled obverse type. While perhaps not as clear as the 1956 coin just discussed before, this is all the same an attractive variety. The date is the clearest point of interest, despite the letters of Liberty being affected as well. The 1 as well as the 9 of the date display doubling towards the southeast. Graded by PCGS as Proof 67 red cameo, it attained a closing price at auction of $720. Then we have a coin from 1942 and the San Francisco Mint that displays multiple varieties at once. There is simultaneously doubling on the obverse design as well as having a repunched mint mark. The doubling, though, is seen on most of the obverse lettering as well as the designs of Lincoln's bust. It is easiest to spot on the number 9 of the date. Then the S mint mark's initial punching can be seen towards the left of the bottom serif, as well as inside both of the cavities of the S. Graded by PCGS as MS66 plus red, this gem of a coin achieved a closing price at auction of $750. The next coin is a surprisingly easy one to overlook if we're being completely honest, because of the way that the doubling took place on this coin. A modern 2009 proof strike of the formative years centenary penny. As is the case with most of these coins, the doubling took place on Lincoln's hand. Specifically, the index finger is doubled towards the top, from the knuckle towards the spine of the book that he is holding. Graded by PCGS as Proof 69 red, deep cameo, it sold at auction for $780. A variety that was discovered fairly recently for the 1945 issue of Lincoln Cent is this doubled obverse type, which has been growing in popularity ever since its inclusion in the Cherry Picker's Guide. Now, to find the doubling on this coin, your best bet is to look at the letters of Liberty, where most of the letters are doubled towards the top, but the B, E, R, and mostly the Y, also displayed this doubling in the clearest fashion. Graded by PCGS as MS65 Red, this stunning example was sold at auction for $780. The San Francisco Mint started minting pennies in 1909, and by the time that this coin comes around in 1911, we already have a good handful of great varieties to search for from this branch mint. This is the 1911 S over S repunched mint mark variety. The initial S mint mark is struck in, and in fact the remnants of it can still be seen towards the west of the primary S mint mark, appearing in this case almost like a shadow or a ghost image towards the left. This coin was graded by PCGS as MS64 Red Brown, and at auction was able to sell for $780. 1927 was a time when the 20s were in fact still roaring, and the Great Depression that would rock the world only a few years away could not be imagined by most. 1927 also has a doubled obverse penny with some moderate doubling that you can look for. The letters of "In God We Trust" is the primary place of interest for this coin, where the doubling displays towards the left of the letters. PCGS graded this coin as MS64 Red, and at auction it sold for $810. Entering the 1940s, there seemingly was a surge of really good variety coins emanating from every single date and branch mint. This 1942 D over D penny is a primary example of just that, and it's not even the only D over D repunched mint mark that is seen from this issue either. The initial D on this coin can still be detected directly to the top of the primary D mint mark. This coin was sold at auction graded by PCGS as MS67 Red for the sum of $840. On to 1972 from there, and in the spirit of minor varieties, we have a doubled tail 2 variety now. Not the headline varieties from 1972 that get all of the attention, and perhaps rightly so, but here the doubling is concentrated more specifically. Look towards the tail of the base of the number 2 in the date, and you should be able to spot the doubling due north, although with a slight diagonal slant. PCGS graded this coin as MS66 Red, and during the auction it raised exactly $900. Of the 3 major variety coins for the 1936 penny, this would be the third example, where the doubling is mostly concentrated on the letters of "In God We Trust." The best of the doubling can be spotted on the "In God" section of the design though, where the doubling displays towards the left of the letters in question. The example of the coin on offer was graded by PCGS as MS66 Red, and at auction it sold for $900. Heading back to the early years of the Lincoln Penny series for now to find a lovely repunched mint mark in the form of the 1910 S over S variety. Now, it should be noted that there are multiple similar varieties that match this description. This, however, is the FS502 type, where the initial S was struck in due north of the primary S mint mark, with most of the top of the S still seen at that position, making this a very attractive variety coin, and a popular one at that to boot. This example was graded by PCGS as MS65 Red, and at auction it sold for $1,080. I feel like the 1960 penny really deserves more attention. There are some fantastic varieties scattered all throughout this year's production run. Another one like that is found on the proof cent for this year. This is the 1960 large date proof doubled reverse cent. The doubling is not as dynamic as some of the others on this list, but it is still the strongest of the various such coins known. Now, you can locate the doubling primarily on the right face of the memorial building, especially on the entablature as well as on the foundation stones right next to the designer's initials. This example of the coin was graded by PCGS as proof 67 red and sold at auction for $1,200. A variety that is difficult to find and one that not a lot of people are talking about or even seem to be aware of. The 1966 doubled reverse memorial cent. The doubling is fairly uniform across the lettering around the rim of the coin, especially on the letters of United States of America, where it displays towards the left of the letters in the form of very clear separation lines. Similar doubling is then also seen on 1 cent. This example was graded by PCGS as AU55 and at auction it managed to sell for the price of $1,050. The 1946 S wheat cent is one that should always be examined a little closer, as there is a sneaky inverted mint mark, as well as this excellent S over D over mint mark variety. On this coin, look towards the S mint mark just below the date. You can see the remnants of the initial D that was struck in prior to the final S mint mark being impressed. Look below the top serif of the S to see the top rounding of the D mint mark, and the upright vertical bar of the D connecting the bottom serif of the S towards the top rounding. Graded by PCGS as MS66 plus red, this prize example of this coin was sold at auction for $1,200. 1928 has an interesting design variety to look out for, and one that has been building in popularity over the last several years. This is the 1928 large S wheat cent. You see, in this year, the mint used two distinct and different S mint marks for pennies minted at San Francisco. Comparing the two, known as the large and small S types, next to each other, the differences soon become clear. The large S is by far the scarcer of these two, and this example of the coin was graded by PCGS as MS64 red-brown to sell at auction for $1,200. Here is a great transitional variety from 1960, a small date over large date proof penny, where the initial hubbing took place with a large date design, and then the second squeezing then was implemented with a small date design instead. You can see the effects of this clearly on the date, where you can see the underlying large date, and then in most cases the outline of the small date type over top of that. This is the second of three substantial doubled obverse varieties for the proof cent in this year, characterized further by rather obvious doubling found on the letters of liberty, especially the B and E of that word. PCGS awarded this coin with a grade of proof 68 red, and at auction it achieved the price of $1,260 by final call. The 1910 S wheat penny is already a semi-key date for the series, and as such will attract a premium just for being what it is. Add to that the repunched mint mark variety, and what you have here is somewhat of a perfect storm. On this coin, the secondary S mint mark was struck in due south of the primary impression, leaving a slight doubling effect on the mint mark towards the south, even though, to be clear, doubling isn't the right word for what this is, but it is the same effect in practice. Graded by PCGS as MS64 red-brown, this coin was sold at auction for $1,260. A very rare and also somewhat unintuitively underreported variety coin is the 1929 S/S repunched mint mark variety. For this coin, you can see that the first attempt to strike the S mint mark was higher than the final placement. Today, the top portion of the S is seen directly towards the north of the S as a result. This coin is graded by PCGS as MS65 red and was sold at auction for the sum of $1,260. From that point, we head back to 1925 to view a brilliant specimen of the 1925 S/S repunched mint mark variety. This coin is a fairly popular variety, as you would expect from a bronze mint coin from this decade, but locating a high-grade example of this coin can prove challenging. The S mint mark, or rather what remains of the initial impression of the S mint mark, can be seen towards the south of the primary impression. Almost the entire lower third of the S remains intact, although to a characteristically diminished degree. Graded as MS63 red-brown by PCGS, this wheat scent variety was sold at auction for $1,320. Amazingly, 1944 has more than one over mint mark variety to keep an eye out for. Only one of these is listed in the Red Book, and this coin that we are looking at now is not that specimen. Rather, this is the more abundant example, I would say. Here, the initial S mint mark does not display far to the north as it does with the previous and more valuable but definitely scarcer example, but instead, the initial and underlying S mint mark is seen inside and slightly towards the left of the primary D mint mark. The coin here was graded as MS66 plus red by PCGS, and at auction it was sold for the sum of $1,320. Then we have a fantastic variety that was the result of not a mistake or an error on the part of some mint personnel, but rather a catastrophic failure of the reverse coining die itself, characterized by a massive cut that is impossible to miss on the reverse of the coin, nearly obliterating half of the letters of 1 cent. In addition to that, there is also signs of a significant counterclash that took place, where just above the date on the obverse you can see a partial impression of the letters of Liberty. This coin was graded by PCGS with a grade of AU58, and by final call the auction had closed for $1,320. The 1944 penny is certainly rich in opportunities for those willing to search for varieties. With a multitude of different varieties to look out for, one of those is this repunched mint mark variety that comes to us courtesy of the Denver Mint. Here, the initial impression of the D mint mark can be seen directly towards the north of the primary mint mark. This phenomenal coin was graded as MS67 plus red, and at auction it managed to raise no less than $1,560. One of the more minor varieties to look out for in the 1983 cent is this doubled obverse example, not nearly as bold as the doubled ear or the more famous doubled reverse varieties that are also known for the same issue, but still there is quite a clear doubling that can be detected on the letters of Liberty, at least to a degree, displaying as separation lines towards the north of the letters, best seen on the B and R of that word. Further signs can also then be found on the letters of In God We Trust, especially the In God We section, with separation lines here displaying towards the west of the letters in question. Graded by PCGS as MS67 red, it attained the final price at auction of $1,560. Following the virtual drought of variety coins for Lincoln pennies throughout the early 1930s. 1934 arrives with a handful of spectacular varieties to search for. This 1934 D over D repunched mint mark variety is one of the nicer ones of those. You can see that the initial D mint mark was struck in slightly tilted and towards the north of the final placement, with the upper and lower serif still seen clearly on this premium example of the coin, in addition to the lower part of the secondary D being detectable inside the protected cavity of the D. This example of the coin was graded by PCGS as MS67 red, and at auction it was sold for $1,680. On the 2004 Memorial Cent, this coin is actually a case of a more prominent doubled reverse, which is not usually the norm for the series. Doubling here is displayed mostly in the form of additional thickness to the letters as a result of the moderate spread. Displayed chiefly in the letters of E pluribus unum, you can see that the letters are a lot wider, especially towards the left-hand side, than they really were designed to be. The same can also be said for the dots that divide the words, which are now almost oval-shaped instead of round and appear to be elongated. Receiving a grade of MS67 red from PCGS, it closed at auction for $1,800 by final call. 1941 is the host of our next variety. This is a great coin because despite being an old-school variety, known for many years, it can still be cherry-picked with a bit of luck today. For this coin, you can look towards the letters of liberty, especially the I, B, and E of the word. Here you can see the doubling very clearly. Then the letters of trust are doubled very widely. But because the first impression was set too shallow, it doesn't actually display the full letter. But you can see the doubling towards the bottom half of these letters. PCGS gave this coin a grade of MS66 red, and when its turn at the auction block came, it sold for $1,800. From there, we head to 1927 and the Denver Mint to discover a fairly strong repunched mint mark variety that remains surprisingly elusive, despite becoming more sought after in recent years. Sometimes a coin is rare because not very many of them have been discovered, but then other times it's just because not very many of them were made to begin with. Upon closer inspection, the repunching of the D mint mark becomes immediately apparent, with both of the serifs clearly doubled and the initial D impression seen inside the cavity of the D mint mark. This MS64 red-brown example of the variety was sold at auction for $1,800. When speaking of Lincoln Cent varieties and the year 1955, one coin immediately jumps to mind. But there are actually a few decent varieties to look for in this one date. One of those is this proof penny that is a combined double die obverse and reverse variety. On the obverse, the date is doubled, not as dramatically as its bigger brother, but still a fair amount of discernible doubling, especially in the tails of the 9 and the 5s. On the reverse, at the same time, we can see very clear doubling on the letters of E pluribus unum, displaying mostly towards the south, with separation lines seen on virtually all of the letters. Graded by PCGS as proof 68 red, this was sold at auction for $2,280. 1960 counts as a transitional year for the US Mint, as early on in the year it was discovered that the number 0 in the date of 1960 was too small, and that in production the dies were prone to filling and cracking at this point as a result. The date was then slightly redesigned, and so the large and small date varieties were born. This small date variant of the coin is the scarcer of the two two types, with the large date being the more plentiful. This example we see here was graded as MS67 plus red by PCGS, placing it at the very top of the population report, and for that it secured a final bid at auction of $2,280. The first half of the 1930s can be a bit slim pickings for the Lincoln Cent variety hunter, with the exception probably of the 1934 issue, perhaps, but 1935 does have a very attractive double-die obverse coin to look for at the same time. Here, the hallmark of the coin in terms of doubling is definitely on the date, where most of the numbers are consistently doubled towards the north, and not exactly in a subtle way either. This coin is, not surprisingly, one of the finest known of the variety, and was graded by PCGS as MS66 red and was sold at auction for $2,340. From there, we head back to the steel pennies of 1934 and the veritable treasure trove of varieties that are to be discovered on these coins. This example is a double-die reverse specimen where the doubling can be detected on nearly all of the design elements. The letters of E pluribus unum, displaying the doubling in the form of extreme additional thickness, mostly towards the south of the letters in question. The N of 1 in 1 cent also displays this effect, but this time with the added indulgence of a clear separation line towards the top of the diagonal line, with the right wheat stalk also doubled with clear doubling displaying towards the rim of the coin towards the top and tip of the wheat stalk. Graded by PCGS as a fantastic MS67, this great little coin was sold for $2,400. Now we have the chance to examine the second of three very desirable double-die obverse varieties for the Lincoln wheat penny from 1936. On this coin, as it is with the FS101 example as well, the date is doubled rather strongly, with all the numbers of the date displaying the doubling with dramatic effect across the board. But this variety is differentiated by the fact that the R in Liberty has what is referred to as a broken left leg, a distinct characteristic for this type. Now, this coin was slabbed by PCGS with a grade of MS66 red and at auction was sold for $2,400 even. The 1942 penny has proven itself fertile hunting grounds for the variety collector and coin searcher, with multiple popular varieties to look for here. One of the more challenging ones to look for is the 1942 triple punched mint mark variety. Challenging because the main diagnostic points for the coin tend to fade very quickly, leaving only secondary markers to identify the coin with. On this example, the bottommost remnant of the initial S is already gone, and only a very faint remnant of the northeastern impression is left. This stunning Pop 1 example of this variety coin is graded as MS67 red and achieved a closing price at auction of $2,460. The extremely famous or well-known varieties from 1970 and 72 are oftentimes discussed, but a variety that gets a little less press is actually the 1971 doubled obverse cent. This example of the coin is simply exemplary, with even the doubling on the date, which is usually fairly faint, being extremely clear and unmistakable on this coin. Similarly, the doubling that is found on the letters of Liberty display boldly towards the west, and the letters of In God We Trust also leave very little doubt as to the coin's variety status. This example was graded by PCGS as MS66 red and by auction's end was sold for $2,640. 1968 harbors a number of interesting varieties for the Lincoln penny, but one that seems especially difficult to obtain is the 1968D double die reverse cent. On this coin, doubling is seen on multiple of the design elements on the reverse of the coin, including the letters of E pluribus unum that all display clear notching towards the top right portions of the letters. This is especially true of the L, both U's, and the I of pluribus. The dots separating the words of the motto are also doubled and appear elongated towards the southeast. This coin was graded as MS66 plus red from PCGS, and at auction it was sold for the sum of $2,880. The 1972 double die obverse memorial cent is easily one of the best variety coins from that decade, and is ranked as one of the top 5 varieties within the series as a matter of course. The strong clockwise spread on the classical class 1 hub doubling is beautifully exemplified. First on the date, where you really can't miss the doubling, and then on all of the obverse lettering, including the letters of Liberty and that of In God We Trust. This stunning coin was able to secure a closing price of MS67 from PCGS, and in turn a closing bid at auction of $2,880. A relatively minor wheat cent variety coin that almost never receives any attention is the 1946 D over D repunched mintmark coin. By examining the mintmark area, you can clearly see that there was an initial D mintmark initially placed towards the northeast of the primary punching. The San Francisco mints, repunched and especially their over mintmark varieties, do get a lot of attention, but I'll be willing to bet that most people weren't even aware of this one. Graded by PCGS as MS67 plus red, it sold at auction for $2,880. 1955 was the last year that the San Francisco Mint would strike pennies before it was effectively mothballed and turned into a vault and assay office, until its return to form and resurrection in 1968. But what interests us about this 1955 wheat cent is the fact that it is a triple punched mintmark variety. That's right, this is an S over S over S north. You can see towards the north of the primary mintmark that there were 2 very clear initial and secondary attempts made to strike in the S mintmark before the third image was finally placed correctly. Either this one was made first thing on a Monday morning, or perhaps very much 4 o'clock on a Friday. I'll leave it to you to decide. Graded by PCGS as MS67 plus and looks every bit the part, was sold at auction for $3,600. The 1943 over 2S steel cent variety is a great example of why continued study of new and, in fact, in this case, long since discovered coins should be required. For years, it was thought that this coin was just a simple, although impressive, double die obverse variety. But it was confirmed only a few years ago that it is, in fact, also an overdate variety, though this is a later die state example, and as such the 2 underdate is not very clear. The doubling on this one though, the 9 and the 4 in particular, is quite unmistakable, and as such PCGS has also certified the coin with a grade of MS67+. At auction it changed hands for the sum of $3,840. The 1970s large date double die obverse memorial cent remains one of the best varieties in the series, and it frankly baffles me that this fantastic coin remains so obviously undervalued after all of these years. There is doubling evident on the date, yes, but where this coin truly shines is on the letters of In God We Trust. The strong doubling is immediately self-evident when looking at this part of the coin, with all of the letters doubled quite boldly towards the left. This very very rare variety coin was slapped by PCGS with a grade of MS65 red, for which it was able to sell at auction for $3,840. 1983 is really a great year for variety coins. There's so many great varieties to look for in this date, both from the Philadelphia and Denver mints. One of my favorites is actually this 1983 double die Optus penny. It displays moderate but very distinct doubling on the numbers of the date, mostly displaying towards the south in the form of separation lines on the 9, the 8, and the 3, with the tail of the 3 being a lot thicker than it really should normally be. There is also some minor doubling on the letters of In God We Trust, but the thing that always catches my eye when I see one of these is the doubling that appears on the ear, right in the center of the coin. Graded by PCGS as MS67 red, this gem of a coin was sold at auction for $3,840. 1995 has one of the best-known penny varieties from the last, say, 30 years, but the Denver Mint also produced a great variety in the same year. The 1995 D double die Optus penny shows a good amount of doubling on the date, though the 5 is without a doubt doubled the strongest in this case. And since the mint was adding the mint mark directly onto the working hub at this point, we also see similar doubling on the mint mark, displaying towards the southeast. But the strongest doubling on this coin is to be found on the letters of In God We Trust, where all of the letters are doubled very strongly towards the right, with the We Trust portion being doubled towards the most dramatic effect. This example was graded by PCGS as MS67 plus red and sold at auction for the sum of $4,800. This coin used to be very deeply underappreciated in the market, but fortunately, and as this example will very well demonstrate, that is no longer the case. What we are looking at now is the 1960 D over D small over large date penny, a monster of a transitional variety, which is both a double die Optus and a repunched mint mark variety at the same time. The initial D mint mark was struck in far towards the northwest of the intended position. You can see here that it actually touches the 9 in the date. It's so far out of place. Then the date is doubled as the first hubbing took place with a large date working hub, and it was then impressed again with a small date type to create the doubling that we can see here on all of the numbers in the date. The coin was graded by PCGS as MS66 plus red, and when the auctioneer's gavel fell, it had set a new auction record for the issue of $5,040. 1941 actually has multiple extremely collectible varieties to look for. This example is of the FS103 type and has multiple points of interest to look for, but the most prominent is likely the boldly doubled ear right in the very center of the coin. In addition to this, the last several letters of Liberty, especially the T and the Y, are doubled towards the southwest, and then finally the date is also doubled in a similar manner, but this time we can pay closer attention to the first 1 and the 9, especially towards the top curl of the 9. Graded by PCGS as MS66 red, this stunning coin was sold at auction for $5,040. Then we head back to the very first year that the Lincoln Cent was even issued, 1909, and the San Francisco Mint for a repunched mint mark variety. But on this coin, the initial S mint mark was punched in the wrong orientation. This is the S over horizontal S variety. In other words, the first S was struck in on its side, necessitating the second punching to correct the orientation. This, in combination with the fact that the 1909 S penny already had a low mintage to begin with of just over 1.8 million coins, makes this one extremely popular variety coin. Graded by PCGS as MS67 Red, the coin was sold at auction for $5,280. I don't think it's exactly a stretch to say that the 1955 double-die obverse Lincoln penny is the most famous variety coin, definitely the most sought-after one, with every last element of the obverse of the coin being doubled to at least some extent. The date is naturally the place that draws the most attention and exemplifies the term seeing double, but the letters of "In God We Trust" achieve complete separation and is the best example of just how wide the spread on this coin truly is. This is a truly stunning example of the coin as well, with bright orange, fiery red surfaces that literally shines under light. Graded by PCGS as MS64 Red, it achieved a closing price at auction of $17,400. A famous proof coin variety from the series is the 1990 No S Lincoln Cent, where the customary S mint mark that should appear just below the date to indicate that the coin was minted at the San Francisco Mint is missing, or more specifically, it was accidentally omitted. This is a coin that could only be obtained from the 1990 proof set and not from circulation. This example was graded by PCGS as Proof 69 Deep Cameo and saw a closing price at auction of $5,280. The places of interest on most Lincoln Cent variety coins are to be found on the obverse of the coin. This 1983 double-die reverse, however, is a notable exception to that generalization. Here, the reverse of the coin is doubled to such dramatic effect that it should be noticeable to the naked eye. Almost everything is doubled, including the motto of E Pluribus Unum, the letters of United States of America, the memorial building, especially the steps to the bottom of the building, and the letters of 1 cent, with the doubling displaying due south in all cases. This example received a grade of MS68 Red from PCGS to close at auction for $5,280. By 1930, the United States, and in fact the world, was firmly entrenched in the Great Depression, and as a result, the mintage figures had dropped markedly since just the previous few years. In fact, they stopped making half dollars and silver dollars completely by this time, though mintages would again resume in a few years' time. Not even the wheat cent was immune from this either, but we still managed to get a nice repunched mint mark variety out of it from the San Francisco Mint, at least, where you can see the remnant of the initial S due north of the final placement. This luminous example of the variety was graded by PCGS with a lofty MS67 Red and got a final price at auction of $6,000. By now, we are probably all familiar with the 1922 No D Lincoln Cent, but something that oftentimes gets overlooked when discussing that famous variety is the fact that there is also known varieties where the D mint mark is not erased completely, but is instead barely legible. This is an example of just such a weak D 1922 penny. Not only that, but this is an example that still has original red mint luster intact, making the blurry weak D mint mark even more of an attraction on this coin, which was slabbed by PCGS with a grade of MS64 Red and sold at auction for $7,200. Collectors are, much to my delight, finally beginning to pay more attention to mint mark styles, and in consequence, varieties like this 1928 large S penny have begun to increase in value quite rapidly over the last number of years. On a small number of 1928 cents, the US Mint employed a trumpet-style S, which was significantly larger than the normal S used on most of the coins. Comparing the two different S mint marks side by side is really the best way to spot the differences. This example was graded by PCGS as MS65 red and achieved a closing price at auction of $7,200. In the early 1990s, the US Mint slightly tweaked the reverse of the Lincoln penny. This new reverse was intended to be pressed into service with the commencement of the 1993 memorial cent. But in late 1992, a few coins were accidentally struck using this new reverse. This is how the 1992 close AM variety was created. On this coin, the A and the M of America are a lot closer to each other than on the normal or the wide AM coin, practically touching each other at their base. There are a few other differences as well, but this is really the main attribution point. Graded by PCGS as MS66 red, this stunning coin was sold at auction for the lustrous price of $9,600. In 1943, the US Mint switched the Lincoln cent from its usual copper to a zinc-coated steel penny instead. This was to save precious copper for the war effort in Europe and the Pacific. But in this one-year issue, there were also a number of variety coins that came to be. One of the most prominent, surely, has to be this D over D repunched mint mark coin, where the initial D was struck in far to the southwest of the intended position, almost making the two D mint marks look like two links in a broken chain. This coin was graded as MS67 by PCGS, making it one of the finest known of the type. At auction, it sold for the sum of $12,000. One of the things that makes the Lincoln cent series so much fun to collect and fascinating to study is the regularity with which variety coins appear. And right from the start, in the coin's very debut year of 1909, we have a beautiful double-die obverse variety in the 1909 VDB penny. On this coin, the date is doubled, with the initial image being clearly seen towards the right of the numbers of the date, with the last three letters of Liberty, in other words the RT and Y, all doubled in the same manner as well. With the coveted grade of MS67 red, it is hardly a surprise when this coin was sold at auction for $15,600. Throughout the Lincoln cent series, there are a handful of instances of what have been commonly known as the doubled ear varieties, where the doubling displays in such a manner that Lincoln appears to have two earlobes or a doubled ear. The 1984 doubled ear coin is likely one of the most prominent of these. Other than the very obvious doubling towards the ear, the bow tie and beard are also doubled on this coin, though the ear is far easier to identify than the last two. In addition to that, this coin also displays a rather severe case of plating blisters, a type of plating error that plagued the copper-coated zinc core coins for the first several years that they were made in the early 1980s. This coin is graded by PCGS as an excellent MS68 plus red, and when the auctioneer's gavel fell, it had sold for $15,600. The 1964 SMS coins represent a bit of a mystery. The Mint has no official record of having struck these coins, of which around 50 or so sets are estimated to exist. And the US Mint only issued SMS or special mint sets between 1965 and 1967. The coin has a very unique finish to it, a step above business strike to be sure, but definitely not proof either. Is it possible that these coins might have been trial strikes, produced in anticipation for making the 1965 SMS sets? A logical conclusion, but lacking any evidence, we really can't say for sure. This example was graded by PCGS as MS65 Red and sold at auction for $18,000. The 1917 double die obverse is definitely one of the most popular and elusive varieties in the early Lincoln series. The first known reports of this variety only took place as late as 1977, 60 years after its initial release. All the numbers of the date are doubled. However, both the 9 as well as the 7 of the date are doubled to especially pleasing effect. Especially the upper portion of the number 9, while the date is definitely, and with good cause, the variety's hallmark. The letters of "In God We Trust" are also doubled sufficiently to merit consideration, with the doubling on the "In God We Trust" section displaying mostly towards the right of the letters in question. The coin was graded by PCGS as MS65 Red, and it is truly a rare occasion that you can see a coin of this variety in such a high grade. At auction, it was sold for $19,200. The 1911 penny has a tendency to develop carbon spots or tone in unattractive manners if the coins are improperly stored. Add to that the fact that in previous years many unscrupulous dealers would have cleaned these coins to restore the red luster, if only temporarily so, in order to sell them more quickly. So finding a gem-level example free from all of these issues is a treat in today's market. This PCGS graded MS67 Plus example of the 1911 penny was sold at auction for $22,800. One of the clearest examples of an over-mintmark variety coin is seen here, that being the 1944 D over S wheat penny. It is with good reason that it is one of only 2 such variety coins that are currently listed in the Red Book. The remnant of the original S mintmark that was initially struck in here can clearly be seen towards the north of the D mintmark, just below the first 4 in the date. This beautiful coin has been certified by PCGS with a grade of MS67 Red and was sold at auction for the sum of $23,400. Along with, I'd argue, the 1955 and possibly the 1972 double die obverse varieties, the 1969 S double die obverse is one of the most sought after varieties in the Lincoln penny series. Easy to understand why, too, when you look at just how wide the spread on these coins actually are. Shortly after the coin's release, there was actually some confusion as the Secret Service mistakenly believed the issue to be a forgery, and in so seized and destroyed a number of coins before the US Mint confirmed that they are in fact genuine. This example is graded by PCGS as MS63 Red Brown and saw a closing price at auction of $26,400. The 1922 No D wheat cent is a legendary rarity within the series, and despite being a variety, it is often collected as a separate issue alongside the base 1922 D penny. When a minting error occurred, the Denver Mint's D mint mark was inadvertently removed from a small number of the 1922 D coin. Notably, the reverse of the coin was replaced with a fresh, strong die with crisp details. The last 2 in the date was also then re-engraved, but the D mint mark was not awarded the same courtesy, perhaps thinking that it was unimportant, and in so doing inadvertently creating a scarce variety coin. This example is graded as MS64 Brown by PCGS and was able to secure a price of $31,200 at auction. The 1922 D penny, where the D mint mark is actually correctly impressed, by contrast, is a moderately rare coin by the series' standards. Not really that hard to come by with a mintage of 7,160,000 coins. It ranks at the number 12 slot in terms of the lowest mintage coins. Where the coin becomes genuinely rare, though, is in a fully red gem-level coin with a sharp and full detail strike, as most coins seen are circulated or struck with less than an exemplary details from worn-out dies. This coin stands at the very top of the conditional census with a grade of MS66 plus red from PCGS. It sold at auction for $26,400. This is the first and most sought after of the 3 strong and prominent double die obverse varieties that are easily collectible for the 1936 Lincoln cent, though it is worth noting that a number of more minor varieties are also known. In this case, the doubling can be easily detected on all of the obverse letterings of "In God We Trust," as well as the letters of liberty. It is especially strong on the letters of trust and God. But of course, the date itself is also doubled with sufficient dramatic effect to justify this variety status as a sought-after Red Book listed variety. Graded by PCGS as MS67 Red, it again is the finest known of its type, and at auction it sold for $34,800. 1959 was the first year of issue for the then new memorial design of the Lincoln cent. In the November edition of the 1959 Numismatic Scrapbook magazine, a claim appeared that some collectors have come to the conclusion that the new memorial design penny was slightly larger in diameter and slightly thinner than the wheat cent used to be. Apparently, they were able to fit 51 pennies into a roll designed for only 50, and then somehow came to this unfounded conclusion that the mint was very quick to refute. Standing at a grade of MS68 Red from PCGS, this is one of only 2 such coins known at this grade point, making it an unmissable opportunity for any serious registry set collector, a fact reflected in the record-setting price of $38,400. In 1915, the US Mint slightly reworked the master hub for the Lincoln obverse. The effects of that can clearly be noted on this coin, with the details of the hair and beard being particularly sharp and apparent. What we have here is one of the finest known of the type. PCGS and NGC combined have only certified 4 coins with none finer. Little surprise then that this MS67 Red gem example, virtually free from blemishes or imperfections, was able to secure a final bid at auction of $40,800. Each date or issue in the series has its own little quirks that form part of its story. The 1913 penny, for instance, has a reputation for being particularly well struck, and this example of that coin is a prime example of just that. Great details on a fiery red planchet, preserved in a grade of MS67 plus red as certified by PCGS. This coin set a new auction record for the issue at a final price of $60,000. When thinking of rare and valuable wheat pennies, the 1927 is not typically one that immediately jumps to mind. In fact, it is really quite common in all grades. It had a large mintage, and full bankrolls were hoarded by collectors. You can easily get an MS-65 coin for probably no more than $120 with a bit of patience and a charming disposition. But this coin is Pop 1, with none finer known. So instead of boring you with another explanation of what a conditional rarity is, let's look at something a little more tangential, shall we? Have you ever noticed that the US Mint changed the design of the number 7 in the date every single decade? Well, it started off in 1917, where the flag of the 7 had a nice little wave to it, just like a real flag. Tongue-in-cheek, I can appreciate that. Then, in the Roaring 20s, the 7 had a nice little Art Nouveau jazzy curve to it, with a much more rigid flag this time. By 1937, oh my, things get a bit stretched out. It's the laid-back, lazy 7. By 1947, they finally got it right and gave the 7 a long tail to match that of the 9. Seriously, how did it take them 20 years to figure that one out? And then, 1957 has a very bureaucratic, square 7. But at least the 5 of the date this time has a nice long tail, so that it kind of balances out with the square 1 in front. Anyway, back to this 1927 penny, which was graded by PCGS as MS68 Red and sold at auction for an astounding $84,000. Subscribe to WNN and activate all notifications with the bell icon so you'll know when new videos are released. For the World Numismatic News, I am Numisman saying thank you for watching. Keep collecting and have a fantastic day.